All right, the enemy is just over that rise. They've been shelling us for days. And our job is to put them out of commission. They've got 3 machine guns, a couple of mortars, but we're going to do it. We're going to do it not because we're heroes, not because we want medals, but because of the power of cowardice. Power of cowardice. It's a TEDx talk. Doesn't seem very likely. There have been 2 TEDx talks with cowardice in the title. Both were called Cowardice and Courage. And both are actually about courage. Nobody wants to talk about cowardice. You can trust me because I'm the world's leading authority on the subject. Last year I published a book, Cowardice, A Brief History. If you go to the Library of Congress subject catalog and enter Cowardice and History, there will be one entry, my book. I'm the founder, and at this point the sole practitioner of cowardice studies, new field of study. My mother's not particularly proud. Nobody wants to think about cowardice. Even the great catalog of human sin and baseness in Western literature, Dante's Inferno, makes very short work of the matter. This is just inside the gate of hell. Dante and Virgil are there on the left. The first thing they see are these countless souls flailing, trying to slap at wasps and flies that are biting them. And Dante asks Virgil, what did they do in their lives that they should be condemned to such a fate? And Virgil says, these were the abject who didn't participate in life. They were spectators, essentially. They didn't do anything. They were passive neutrals. And Virgil says, let us not speak of them. My message to you is speaking about cowardice is actually more important in many respects and more practically useful than speaking or thinking about courage. And it's so important and so powerful in large part because of the great contempt we associate with cowardice. These souls are the most despicable in all of Dante's Inferno. They're not even across the river in hell proper. But the damned who are in all those circles of hell look down on these souls because they didn't do anything. A more contemporary piece of evidence of the contempt in which we hold cowardice, UrbanDictionary.com, tells us that it's the most insulting word known to man. Sounds about right, right? I don't know if you remember this. April 16th, 2013, I-93 South. It was a day after the Boston Marathon bombing. Nobody knew who it was at that point. We didn't know why they had done it or what they were going to do next. But we knew they were cowards. The contempt we hold for cowards is so strong that men, typically it is men, for reasons we won't have a chance to get into today, but men will do anything to avoid being thought of as cowards. You won't be surprised to learn that criminologists have found that the insult most likely to provoke violence among criminals is coward. So don't go up and call an ex-con a coward. Studies have shown it will not end well. So there's small-scale violence caused by the shame of cowardice. And it also can happen at a large scale. When Lyndon Baines Johnson, early in his presidency, was contemplating what to do in Vietnam, he thought, and I'll quote here, I want to get the president's words right. "If I left that war and let the communists take over South Vietnam, then I would be seen as a coward, and my nation would be seen as an appeaser." And of course, he escalated American involvement in that war, and we all know how that turned out. And the shame of cowardice has caused great bloodshed over the course of history. Look at this statement. "Where there is a choice between cowardice and violence, I would advise violence." This must be Napoleon or perhaps General Patton. In fact, it's Mahatma Gandhi. What is this thing that could lead Mahatma Gandhi to advocate for violence? It's possible, drawing on history that goes back before Aristotle and a convention that endures today, to define it quite simply as the failure to do one's duty because of excessive fear. It's a definition that asks as many questions as it answers, of course. What is duty, and who's to say, for instance? LBJ thought it was his duty and his nation's duty to go to war in Vietnam. Many others thought it was their duty to avoid that war, to protest it. And how about excessive fear? Isn't that an inherently subjective matter? And can't one be excessively fearful of being cowardly? Probably so. It might be that LBJ was excessively fearful of seeming cowardly. The same might have been true of the Boston Marathon bombers. The most easy and sort of obvious place to think about cowardice is on the field of battle, back at that hill. The archetypal, quintessential setting for the demonstration of cowardice. There's a massive study of American soldiers by a sociologist during and after World War II, and it found that very few soldiers aspire to be heroes, but none want to be thought of as cowards. And that drove them to do their duty. This held true in the Civil War as well. This is a sketch of a man just been court-martialed for cowardice, sentenced to be drummed out of his regiment. His head has been shaved. He's wearing a placard that says "coward." There were over 500 such cases in the Union Army. A man named James McPherson, a great Civil War historian, did a study of the motivation of soldiers. He looked at their letters home, and he noted that men wrote much about cowardice because they worried they might be guilty of it, and they desperately wanted to avoid the shame of being known as a coward, and that is what gave them courage. Cowardice can function in this way far from the field of battle as well. Consider me, right here and now. I am feeling fear. Right? Like all sane people, I fear public speaking. Like all academics, I fear the disdain of my fellow academics, thinking, oh, look at him, being a TEDx rock star, right? How middlebrow. Look at the pants, the jacket. I just learned prior to about 10 minutes ago, I knew it was being live streamed, but my in-laws are watching now. That too is a subject for fear. But thinking about cowardice got me on this stage in more ways than one, because thinking about cowardice makes me ask, are my fears excessive? Should I fear speaking before such a kindly audience? Will you somehow deprive me of my next meal if you don't like my talk, or get me fired from my job, or throw rotten vegetables at me? That's when that was a mean thing to say. It tells me you're with me, though. Affectionate mockery. I appreciate that. There are all sorts of times when cowardice can figure in life in this way, for better and worse. Mark Twain spoke of man's commonest weakness, his aversion to being unpleasantly conspicuous, pointed at, shunned, as being on the unpopular side. Its other name is moral cowardice, and is the supreme feature of the makeup of 9,999 men in the 10,000. He went on to say, this is not a discovery. Privately, the dullest of us knows it to be true, this universality of cowardice. He was speaking in 1901 specifically about lynching. Right? And he was saying that the vast majority of people knew it was wrong and knew they should do something about it, but were failing to do so. He referred back to a similar phenomenon happening with slavery. Martin Luther King spoke of, he said, to sin by silence when they should protest makes cowards of men. It's easy to see in the past the kinds of moral cowardice, the things that happened because of it, or allowed to happen because of the moral cowardice of the 9,999. It's harder to figure out what it is today, but one can wonder what future generations will think of us. What duties have we failed because of what fears? Or we can think more personally, right? Of yourselves. Are there times when you have failed because of an aversion to being unpleasantly conspicuous, pointed at, shunned, being on the unpopular side? Times when you failed to back up a friend, perhaps, or stand up and say something, or maybe went along with friends because you feared to be left out, to be uncool, to look bad, to be alone. Look back in your life 5 years, or even last year, or yesterday. Aren't there times when you behaved in a way that was because of a fear you had that, in retrospect, was excessive, was out of proportion to the actual danger you faced? Or you can think about being right here, right now, at this TEDx event, right? And thinking about what it is you're going to do with your life. What is your dream, your calling, your spark? And if you think of your spark as a kind of duty, and think of the things that are keeping you from fulfilling that duty to that spark, ask yourself about the fears you have. Fears of what your parents will think or what your peers will think. Fears of not getting a job, not being able to pay off the loans. Fears of failing. Fears of succeeding. I'm not saying these fears aren't real. There are times, many times, when you need to keep your head down. But I'm also saying that telling yourself to be a hero is not going to be of much use. Because you might not be a hero, right? To hear Twain tell it, none of us are. Not a very TEDx thing to say, I realize. Right? But that doesn't mean you're condemned to cowardice either. Writing a book about the subject, one does see cowardice everywhere. I'm often with Mark Twain, seeing the 9,999, or with Dante, who says, he looks at these souls and says, never did I think death could have undone so many. It's as if that's more people than actually lived. And they're cowards. Right? One sees evasion everywhere. Other writers have spoken of it. T.S. Eliot takes up this very image, and these are the hollow men of the wasteland. Henry David Thoreau spoke of the mass of men leading lives of quiet desperation. But thinking about cowardice can help us actually overcome cowardice. Thinking about cowardice makes us ask, first, what is our duty? It's not a question that we often ask ourselves, I don't think. We'd rather talk about our desires or our rights. There are reasons for that. But it can be bracing. to think of duty instead and focusing. And then if we do our duty, great. If not, we can ask ourselves, why not? There are lots of reasons we might not do our duty. Maybe we're tired, or feeling lazy, or we're not ready, or maybe tomorrow. But thinking about cowardice makes us ask, are those actually just excuses and covers for fear? And if that's the case, we can look at the natures of those fears and ask ourselves, are we feeling excessively fearful? Is our fear out of proportion to the danger? If that's the case, you're being cowardly, and let the shame of cowardice move you to move. Right? That doesn't always work either. Right? Sometimes you might think that you want to do something, you know you're being cowardly, and that doesn't help to make you do it. Here I advise you to steal a page from the ancients' practice of phalanx warfare the Greeks and Romans fought. There they are. Here's a bird's eye view. When they knew some soldiers were more timid, cowardly than others, they would put them in the middle of the phalanx so that, willing or not, they would join the fight. It's possible to apply this strategy far away from the battlefield. This looks somewhat like a phalanx right here, actually. You have around you and can form phalanxes of your own, people who will bear witness to you as you pursue your dreams and help you overcome your fears. And if you're still feeling not up to pursuing them, feeling excessively fearful, put yourself in the middle of the phalanx. I'm with you. There was a great march in the way on our soundtrack there. So nobody wants to think about cowardice. You don't really want to talk about it. The shame of it can be very dangerous, and yet it can be a very bracing and useful thing to think about as well. It pushes us to ponder seriously what it is we should do and what it is we're so afraid of. Thank you.